Hello, and welcome to Electrifying Growth, a podcast brought to you by Edison Partners. I'm Chris Sugden, managing partner here at Edison and your host. There are moments in a person or company's journey that are undeniably electric. The spark or sparks, if you will, that propel you or your company to new heights. With Electrifying Growth, we're here to have in-depth, real conversations with great leaders who have been there and done it before. Edison has been investing in high-growth technology companies for more than 35 years, and I have been here at Edison doing this investing piece for more than 20 years. We've led over 225 investments. We understand that it takes great leaders and visionaries to build market leaders. We are your support system, a CEO and management's entourage, if you will. Let's introduce this episode's guest. Hello, welcome to another edition of Electrifying Growth. I'm your host, Chris Sugden. Our guest today is someone whose work has been at the forefront of the dynamic field of the energy industry. We're thrilled to have with us today Panos Adamopoulos, founder and CEO of Seismos. Seismos is transforming the oil industry with the use of acoustic technology. I can't wait to hear him tell the story because I don't do it justice. The company's offering increases output, reduces costs, and lowers risk, all at a fraction of the cost of other offerings and services similar in the market. Panos has a unique background, including military, engineering, and business. Following his service in the armed forces as second lieutenant and chemical engineer, Panos worked in Silicon Valley before becoming a serial entrepreneur. Seismos is Panos' third company, so you can imagine he has a lot to offer to those aspiring entrepreneurs out there. He successfully founded, grew, and sold multiple businesses prior to starting Seismos, including major companies or projects in nearly every Asian country. In today's conversation, we explore Panos' entrepreneurial journey, his service to his country, and the future of digitization on the infrastructure in the United States, especially something as important as the oil and gas industry. Panos Adamopoulos, thank you for joining me today and joining us today on Electrifying Growth. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me here.
How did I do? Was that close enough?
You tried.
I'm not going to fit into being Greek anytime soon. Is that what you're saying?
It's okay. It's good. It passed the test.
Just barely. Well, again, thank you for joining us here on Electrifying Growth. As we like to do, sort of starting with the how did you get here kind of question. But I actually want to start with a different one because you served in the military. And I'd love to start with personal opinion is I think we should have service as part of the United States sort of policy, if you will, before you go into college. That's easy for me to say since I didn't do it, but I think it's something that we see in foreign countries and does a lot of good. So I'd love to hear how your military service helped you and kind of form some of who you are.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And you need to remember that in Greece, because I'm Greek, serving at the military is mandatory for a fixed amount of time. Like, I think now it's 9 months, 6 months, 9 months, something like this. You know, you have the option, if you want to, you can serve for more. And in my case, it was, a full 2-year period in which I was trained as a second lieutenant. I served in Sparta, so you must have heard of that place. To me, I think it was a very important part of my life and pretty much defined, many traits in my character and my future career as well. It inspired a sense of discipline and order, but, something that was, very much needed, especially as I moved forward with my engineering life, as I embarked on the train of entrepreneurship, did stuff, and especially, with my current endeavor, because I'm in an industry, of course, I'm an acoustics related business, but we serve the oil and gas industry. So, having gone through that background has really been instrumental and very, very important in us doing high quality work.
Being in Sparta, it wasn't sort of in a quote unquote wartime. So what kinds of things did you do?
It's just where the old Sparta is. And it's, there's this, inspirational, aspect of it, being there at that location where, Leonidas and all those famous people lived and did their thing. But you can see the ruins, of the old city. It's just impressive, being at that same location.
For sure. Sorry to go to an aside, but we took our family to Greece for the first time last summer. And boy, it's a beautiful place and the history is amazing.
Did you visit the Peloponnese?
We did. And of course, the Parthenon is it's hard to even fathom until you've gone.
It's unbelievable. It's on the top of the city and, it's illuminated at night and it's just unbelievable.
It's amazing. I mean, for those who are listening, haven't been, it's a must. So let's go to your serial entrepreneur, as I described in your introduction. This is not your first rodeo with Seismos. We'll get to Seismos in a minute. First of all, serial entrepreneur, that's kind of a term of, we all know what that means, but maybe you should talk about it. But this is, I believe, your third company. And I'd love to hear more about, the first couple, and what you learn each time is always when you build on, right, to the next.
And I'm glad you touched on the topic of serial entrepreneurship, because it really shows that it's a process. It's not that, old-fashioned idea that I'm sitting on a dinner table and then, oh, wow, an idea came and I'm writing it on a napkin and it happens. I mean, you see all those famous people. It's because they've done it again and again and again that they became really good at it. Going back to my background, post-military and post all that stuff, I studied chemical engineering. I was in business development for a very long time. I came to the US, the first time in 1999. I worked in finance. I had my MBA at Berkeley, worked in finance in Silicon Valley. I saw the Silicon Valley boom, but I also saw the big dot-com crash. And I think that was, one of the pivotal times in my career, a huge learning experience. At the time, it came with huge dissatisfaction and, almost made me depressed. But it really led to me, making decisions. In 2001, and that was a little bit after the, September 11 event, because I was here in the US, trying to figure out what am I going to do. That's when I took the decision to just do something different, almost crazy. So I joined an opportunity and pretty much flew over to China. I flew out of the US, went to China and joined pretty much a small company that was in the global procurement space, and started as, almost nothing. Like, I went to China without even an agenda, without having anyone to meet to, and pretty much developed a network of more than 1,000 different, manufacturing units. If you remember back in the days, I'm talking about early 2000s, China was a manufacturing hub of the universe. Anything that you wear, use, do here in the US was manufactured in China. So essentially, it was people like me behind, enabling essentially all that, procurement process and having all these things done. So long story short, we took a small company, we grew it significantly. We're based in Nanjing, China. Nanjing is, the south capital of China. Beijing is the north one. Nanjing is the south one. So did that for quite some years. Company did very, very good. And then we sold it, in 2008.
Did you pick China sort of because you knew it was going to boom, or it was just where the opportunity was?
Well, it was already obvious that, everything was happening in China. And it was the center of all, the manufacturing happening. Of course, over time, lots of the manufacturing is happening in China. But it was very interesting for me as an experience. I happened to see places and sites in China that, other people haven't seen. I believe I'm one of the very few cases where I was so deep in China, where I, experienced, a situation where people were coming and taking photos of me just because they had never seen a white Caucasian before, just to give you an example. But it was those opportunities we were looking as we were building a network of essentially manufacturing facilities that were, cost efficient enough so that we can support pretty much the West. So that first company was sold in 2008. And then, because I was good at it, I started a second company myself in, this time it was based in Hong Kong. And that company flourished as well, did great and doing pretty much the same things. And we have many, many different lines. It was going all the way from chemicals to paraffin-made products to garments. All these things were, pretty much business lines that, were manufactured in China. And then 2011 is when I sold my second company. And that's when I, reached a point and I'm like, okay, now what do I do next?
You did the second one pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I became better at what I was doing. It's again a testament at what we were saying. Entrepreneurship, end of the day, is a process. So yeah, that happened very fast, 2011, and that's the aha point where I'm saying, okay, what am I going to do? And if you go back in time, 2011 is a very interesting time. It's shortly after the 2008, period where a bunch of things had gone wrong. Greece was pretty much, sliding into bankruptcy. The whole European continent was shaking because of it. So I wasn't really sure. I'm now in Hong Kong and saying, okay, I've done two businesses, sold two businesses. What comes next? And that's when I, started thinking of, the option of going back to the US. I had spent early days in the US, if you remember, as a student when I had my MBA and working in Silicon Valley. So I said, okay, let's go back. I was thinking of the US. I had always this appreciation for energy. I liked it. Texas, is the hub for energy. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to go to Texas. And again, it was kind of the same recipe as when I took the decision to go to China. It wasn't with a prescription. I didn't really know exactly what I would be doing. I didn't know what the company I would be launching would be. It was more of an exploration mode, me going there, and then things, I would figure things out. So that's pretty much how that journey started.
Were you living in Hong Kong at that point, or were you back here?
I was living in Hong Kong.
Wow.
So yeah, coming back to the US, and that was an adventure by itself. You can't just show up to the US one day and say, okay, here I am, I'm launching a business. There's immigration issues, there's challenges, there's things of all that sort. And the first thing I tried to do to make it easy was to, find it illegal, to put it this way, way of coming into the US. And, the easiest way for a foreigner is education. So I'm 39 years old at the time. I'm like, okay, I want to go back to the US. I want to work on energy, but I have to find a way to go to the US. So I sign up at a program. I already have, 2 masters, and I'm like, okay, why don't I go for my 3rd master's degree? And I sign up for a program called Masters of Science and Technology Commercialization. And that's a program, very highly ranked, number 3 at McCombs at UT, Texas. So I come over, but I'm using that program only as a vehicle to come over. That's at least what I thought, when I was coming. And until I sit in the class, and I realized that the guy next to me is the vice president of Apple, and the guy sitting on my left is the vice president in IBM. And, that kicked, somehow my competitive side. And I'm like, okay, hold on. This is an interesting program. I need to do it right. And actually, why don't I try and graduate, as one of the first? And so that's how things happened. And I came to the US. So I started this program. I did very good. I did graduate first. And upon completion of that program, I'm like, okay, good. I'm here now. I am in Texas. I got some extra knowledge. Why don't I start my next endeavor? And this is pretty much how, I started building in my head the idea of Seismos, and then, things took their route.
So let's dive into Seismos, because we think about the infrastructure in this country. We at Edison, which we're privileged to invest in your company here, we don't make you be on this podcast, but I do disclose that we're an investor in the company, so we're a big fan. The digitization of infrastructure is a big theme, but narrowing it down, the sort of next generation oil field, if you will, and the use of technology there on the ground, that's way too simple.
I want to give a little bit of a highlight of how Seismos started so that you understand a little bit. So I'm a Berkeley graduate, and I'm talking with scientists at the Lawrence National Berkeley Lab. So I'm in discussions with a Russian guy. His name was Valery Korneev. He later on became a friend, a co-founder, and many other things. And Valerie's telling me, you know what? I think I'm the only person in the world who understands this new acoustic, waveform, and it's the latest one discovered. But he's excited for the second part of the sentence, the one that says this new waveform. But I am only focused on that first one. He's like, I am the only person in the world. How often do you hear this? Like when you're an entrepreneur. And so pretty much things started, after that discussion. I was close to Valerie. We developed a relationship. And essentially, we had good comprehension of some acoustic principles now. And the question was, how could we use those principles to essentially make a difference in the energy sector? Now, you mentioned about the energy sector being very analog. Sometimes I call it prehistoric. And maybe I'm a little bit unfair here because there's lots of developments happening in the sector. But when it came to data and real-time data, really, it moved fairly slow. I remember at the time when I started the company, the closest form of delivering data in some form would take massive mobilization of people and equipment, and it would take 12 months to deliver data, to deliver processed data. So the processing itself would take easily 10 to 12 months. So there was obviously an opportunity there, because if you want to optimize, you need time, you need data coming in real time, because that's the only way you can optimize in real time something. Otherwise, that asset is completed, and now you're moving to the next asset. And again, you're going to collect new data, and again, it's going to take 10 to 12 months to process. So that's pretty much sparked the idea that, hey, I can come here with my acoustics and expertise domain and try to introduce a system that can allow the real-time delivery of data. Just to give a snapshot of what Seismos is doing, we are the experts in manipulating sound. That's how I call it. So we send sound very, very long distances. We measure sound reflections. And from those sound reflections, those sound signatures, we can extrapolate information about the remote media. And I can even make it more specific on the product side. We manipulate and we propagate sound through tubular systems. So we typically use a tube to send sound. You may say, how is this relevant? Well, it's everywhere. Like in the case of an oil and gas application, you have a wellbore. That is a tube that is sticking in the ground. And essentially what we do is we send sound. Sound travels miles into the formation. It interacts with the formation. There's signatures coming, and those signatures we translate to what really matters to the engineer, which are physical properties of that formation. And we give that in real time. And once they have that information in real time, they can take smart decisions that affect the economics, of the asset, higher production, cost efficiencies, and so on.
So is sound a new thing to the industry, or is it the way you do what you do the new thing to the industry?
No, sound is not a new thing. Like, first of all, sound is very, very powerful. I many times give that simple example of a room that is full of people speaking a foreign language. So let's say it's Chinese people and you don't speak Mandarin, right? Talking very loud. You walking outside and maybe your wife, being inside that room talking your language, but you can still hear your wife as you walk outside. And why is that? It's because your ear is tuned to the frequency of that signal that essentially your wife is outputting. So sound is very powerful, and it's well known as a discipline. And in geophysics, in different universities, there's lots of people working on it. The way we do it is different. Like the fact that we focus on tubular systems, that we introduce sound through a tubular system, and that's where lots of the secret sauce is in the analysis of the acoustic signatures, where we can take essentially a vibration and translate it to something that is very, very meaningful to the engineer, which is the permeability of the formation, the conductivity of the fractures, the geometry of the fractures, things that are really important to them. And if they know, they can make the smart decisions that we mentioned before.
Now, you clearly, given the background we talked about, you're very worldly, frankly, which you find Americans tend to be a little more less so, kind of blinders on. And you have a global business. So your experience having been in all these different markets must have helped. Being a global business as a small company is difficult, right? To deliver great service, to deliver great product, that follow up, even to know the culture of who you're selling to is something you innately have because you've lived other places. Would your advice to a younger company, a smaller company, to say, be more local first, or would you be global first, given that dynamic?
It depends. It completely depends. And it's something that I've discussed and sometimes even disagreed with our board. I started this company. We launched the product at some point in 2019, and then COVID happened. And you saw what happened in the US, and all of a sudden activity went down to zero.
Right.
And so had we stayed firmly focused on the US at the time, this would have had a big material impact in our business. So sometimes it's circumstances, leading the way. It's not just I want to, it's sometimes I need to. So I went back to the board at the time and said, you know what? The US may be this way, but China has a 7-year subsidy, for our sector. And Middle East is a hot zone. And there's things happening in Argentina. One could say, hey, you're such a small company. You don't have the resources to pretty much support and fuel that international expansion. But on the other end, it was kind of a mandatory move at the time.
You've been out of business.
Yeah. So I can't really say that, hey, there's a recipe, you have to do this, you have to do that. I think you can be opportunistic a little bit. If the circumstances allow, you go global. Now, in my case, it did help. Having all that experience helped big time. Like China, sometimes for US companies is kind of a difficult feat, just because they have this fear. Sometimes there's concerns with IP and things of that sort. But me having been there for 10 years, had that familiarity. So taking that step, identifying the partner, the local partner, vetting the partner, understanding the culture, those were easy things for me. And I think that expedited the process.
Well, one thing you just said, though, is a good entrepreneur does what it takes. You're sort of describing necessity. In your case, was one of the drivers of being global. So it's always a good sign of an entrepreneur, right?
I think it's the definition of a startup, and we need to be agile all the time. And those setbacks is essentially what makes the successful company. Sometimes I say to people that our company is like a cockroach. It survives no matter what. So I think having the ability to be the always surviving cockroach, makes you the successful company. And it's something we did not discuss here, but sometimes they invite me, at a business school to make a presentation about the company. And you know how typically nice entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs come and talk about the hockey stick and all this thing. Typically, I do the opposite. I go there in the room and I'm like, guys, let me show you what can go wrong. Because really, if you take all the things that went wrong in our company, I mean, I shouldn't be here.
Right. The mindset has to be that class. You better be prepared because something's going to go wrong. A lot of things are going to go wrong.
It can be dramatic things going wrong. Like I mentioned Valerie before, what I didn't say is that December 22, 15, he died. I was with the only person in the world who knew a specific set of technology. I had already received the seed round of 4 million and my key person had died. You tell me how to recover after this. And not to mention all these other things that happened afterwards, the engineering failures. Like we licensed the technology from the National Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I mean, it should be bulletproof, right? It came from a nuclear lab. It should be perfect. Well, nothing was working. It had to be fixed all over again. So I had to fix all that technology. And then we're about to launch a first product and the market collapses, 2016, there's an oil price collapse. So everything goes south. Like things of that sort happening every year or two. And some of them are big and dramatic.
Any great entrepreneur knows they're defying the odds. And what you're saying is it's even worse than you think or harder than you think. If we switch gears, you're selling, Seismos to a traditional business, right? The oil and gas industry. Obviously, they're very innovative. The costs, the R&D budgets are astronomical. At the same time, you're bringing a new technology to some degree. Sound was used, but why is yours better? How's it going to work? Talk a little bit about that learning curve to be able to break through and sell to non-tech folks, if you will.
Actually, the folks are very techy. Like the audience that I'm interacting with in the oil and gas market is highly educated. Like it's very, very different than my previous two companies where the audience wasn't as educated. And actually that was something missing. So in this business, they're very, very educated. PhDs, very, very clever people with a very solid science background. However, it's a very slow adopting market. Like if you bring in new technology, it takes forever. And there's some natural inclination for customers to always do what they did before. Like if that's what we did 10 years ago, why don't I keep doing it? The second one is a derivative of the fact that they're very sciencey. So if you bring something that, claims something new on the science side, they want to vet it. And, going through the vetting process, the science vetting process in our industry is not a one-week thing. There's customers where this may have taken 2 and 3 years. It's just unbelievable. So definitely there's an education phase and it takes lots of effort to pretty much get onboarded. But the thing is, if you can really prove that you bring something new and if you can get them to buy in, then you have the stickiness factor and they tend to be very, very sticky, which I think is the point where our company is, because we went through all this cycle of education, of introducing new technology, of having resistance. But now we're at the point where we have very, very loyal and consistent, customers.
They say, and in my experience, I've invested in people like you, entrepreneurs and startups, smaller companies, if you will, not even just startups. It's lonely at the top as CEO. Who do you talk to? You've just talked about many challenges or opportunities, of course, the other side of the coin. But how do you think about mentorship and when you want to bounce an idea off somebody or just even a problem? You can't complain to your team. You got to be the guy's got all the answers, right?
Yeah. That's a very good point you bring. And it's not random that the Y Combinator in California mandates that there's always 2 co-founders and never one. And if you're one and you show up with a pitch, they're like, okay, go away, come back with your co-founder and then come back. I wasn't planning for this to be this way. Like when I started the company that was with Valerie, he died. Remember, that was one.
Right.
There were a couple of other members. But when the aha moment comes where you say, okay, I'm going to quit my other job and do it, not everyone is willing to do it.
Right.
That's part of it. Now about mentorship and all that stuff. Yeah, I am a big advocate of mentorship. I always seek advice and I'm always willing, to get it. And so in the Seismos journey, there's been, key people that, I've embarked, some in a more formal capacity, as an advisor, some in a more informal capacity as a mentor, but who I consult, all the time, trying to get, advice as for how to handle, specific situations. And you also need to remember that I came from outside the industry, right? I was in global procurement before. I did have the academic background. I'm a chemical engineer, but I hadn't really worked in oil and gas. So there's lots of, unique traits in how people behave and how companies behave. So having that set of advisors and that set of mentors that, were essentially guiding me through the process was crucial.
What is your advice for kind of someone in the middle of their career or early as mentors change or needs change? How have you thought about that in terms of same person's been great from the beginning of your career to the end, or what you need out of them and how do you use them? And, or even it's a two-way street, of course.
I had never thought of it this way. I see it as an evolving relationship. One of my mentors is sitting on the board. He is a third party objective, and he has been harsh on me. He has been good with me. Like he's always direct and genuine. And that relationship with him evolves over time. When the company was working out of the garage and it was just me and a couple of people, there was a set of advice that I was receiving from him. As the company grew, that relationship also with him grew, and I'm receiving, advice. But of course, it cannot just be one person. I'm in agreement with you. As you go through different stages and phases of the company, you're looking for people that can complement pretty much, your traits and your skill set, and trying to get, more and more advice. It's the same thing I'm doing with my investors, and you guys are an investor, you know that. So like when the first investor came, lots of feedback. The company was earlier stage. It was more on the time when we were prototyping, trying to establish the vision and, do those early steps in setting up the business. Then the second investor came, Quantum, this big private equity firm established in energy, and we received lots of good guidance and mentorship. And now, in a similar fashion, of course, it's still early in the relationship. It's happening with Edison, where we formed this partnership with you guys, and you're helping us, especially with your operational expertise, and trying to set up the foundation for much faster growth in the future.
That advice you're sharing to others is always valuable. I think there's a pay it forward aspect to your point, sort of different stages, different help, different mentors, depending on where you are in your own journey. It seems most companies, but not all, have sort of a stated set of values, and sometimes they get stuck on the wall and sometimes they're actually real. How do you think about Seismos values and how your company lives them or not?
We want to be fair to our customers, and we really want to make a difference in the market by, creating genuine value add. That on the front side. On the back end, which is how we operate as a company, I think the big word that we use here is the word dependability. We're a small company. We're still 50 to 60 people, right? So by all means, you cannot have always multiple set of eyes looking at things. So if you're in charge of something, we depend on you. And you know that. And because we depend on you, you honor your position and you make sure that everything goes okay. So to me, this is a motto now, right? Because it's really important. It really highlights that in some circumstances and in the circumstances of the startup business, we don't have the infinite resources. You do something, we depend on you. You need to be dependable.
That's great. Really, really good. The question I'd like to ask all guests, because you've been through, and frankly, your journey is really interesting between international, having so much of a worldview is pretty cool. What I know now versus what I know then. So I like to call it the when I was 25 kind of question. So whether you tell your 25-year-old self to do something different, to be something different, or maybe just your kids, what you wish you knew then, what you know now?
It reminds me of a presentation. I once, I was at UT and I watched the presentation of the CFO of BP. And he said, in my life, I always came to crossroads and I knew what the right direction was, and I always took the opposite. So that has stuck in my mind. So would I take the right direction now that I know? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's a very loaded question, the one you're asking. And I faced situations before. So would I change anything? I don't think so. I think I was meant to follow this route. And if it wasn't this one, it would have been some very similar one, if you understand what I'm saying. But definitely I would have been wiser, knowing all these things that, I faced over time.
Because we learned from our failures, do you think you realized that failures were a good thing when you were young?
I think at the time it comes with lots of stress and lots of disappointment and lots of regret for the opportunity cost had you done, the opposite. But I think over time, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because when you're young, you think of failure as like the end of the world. When meanwhile, it's just a speed bump and learning. So to me, that's pretty profound. I think about you're going to fail. In fact, how fast you learn from and keep on moving is a big part of it.
But I think that is a trait now of entrepreneurs, right? You become accustomed to the idea that you're going to fail fast. And it's more about having the mechanism to recover. And that's why entrepreneurship is a process. When I started this company, I had to recruit some people from, big corporates like Exxon. And like one of my early co-founders, I'll call him, was 40 years with Exxon. And he was about to retire. And what I always told him is that, hey, you live that part of life, but there's another side of life which you've never met and you don't know how it is. And it's the entrepreneur's life. And you don't want to die, I said one day, with a what if question. Because that side of the world, I said, is a very, very different one. It's way more exciting. And I can assure you, I tell them, that once you embark on that train, you can never go back. So as we say, there's entrepreneurs and there's the others. So I've decided to be on the entrepreneurs.
One of the others.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, last question. 3 companies, maybe it's not applicable to all 3. Biggest surprise or biggest aha, if there's a thread of aha that you sort of take from all 3, what would it be?
All of them combined. That is the most difficult question you asked me today. Finding common traits in those businesses because they're radically different.
Does it take longer than you ever thought? Is that sort of too cliche? Is that obvious? But the second one didn't take that long. So that's why I'm wondering if that's a bad.
Well, time definitely is a factor. I think you start doing things better as you progress, right? So you become more objective and more experienced. I think you also remove the emotional factor. Early stage executives, CEOs, there's lots of emotions inside. And sometimes, I don't want to say it affects business decisions, but there's always a blend. I think you develop that skill to be more objective, more data, numbers driven, as you move forward. So definitely some of that, in what I see. I will still make the same claim I made at the beginning. Entrepreneurship is a process and you get trained on it. Nothing is random. And as you go through different phases, different companies, you become better at that process. So I do see that happening, in this third company that I'm now leading.
There's sort of a trust. Each of these learnings are building upon the other. Well, look, we really appreciate you joining us today and hope all success. Obviously, we're an investor, so it's a loaded question, right? Or a loaded compliment, but thank you for allowing us to invest in you. Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.